All right. So we're gonna jump right into it. We are starting our 5th unit in AP Biology, which I think is super, super weird to think about. But it is all about heredity. So we're going to talk about just some basics today, vocab words, a little review from freshman bio, getting everything situated. Later this week, we're going, and by later this week, I mean probably tomorrow until Wednesday, we're going to do the process of meiosis. So we talked about mitosis, then we get meiosis. And this should get us through to genetics. So, all that fun stuff. We'll also hit protein synthesis, chromosomes, all that fun stuff. So, this is an introduction to heredity. Hopefully, my handwriting didn't get so super terrible over break. So, introduction to heredity. Whew. There's a desk right there. So, starting us off with just the definition of heredity, it is the transmission of traits from one generation to the next. Transmission of traits from one generation to the next. The overall theme of this unit is going to be all about variation. Where there is variation, where there isn't variation, where variation comes from, why variation is important. So you will probably get very, very tired of me talking about the concept of genetic variation, but it will be ever present. Like I said, we also are talking about genetics. So we're going to get a definition for that too. Genetics is the study of heredity. Heredity and variation. So if you find yourself on the career path to being someone who works with genetics, it is mostly about how traits are passed from parent to offspring. Genetic counselors are a really good and pretty common career path for people who go into genetics. It's all about teaching families the probability that a certain gene will get passed down from parent to offspring, or understanding what how a child was born with a specific genetic disorder, how that genetic disorder will affect them or affect their future offspring if they choose to continue to have children. But that's just one specific way people use genetics as a career. So we will talk about genetics on a bunch of different levels as we make it through this unit. We'll talk about how information is passed from organism to organism, how information is passed from cell to cell, the actual molecule of heredity, how chromosomes work, all that fun stuff. But it all starts with the inheritance of genes. Ooh. That's where we're going to start. So, a gene is a hereditary unit through which Parents pass coded information to offspring. Hereditary unit through which parents pass coded information to offspring. So when we talk about ecology, we're talking in like terms of units of individuals or ecosystems. When we're talking about inheritance, that was really, really wonky, huh? When we're talking about inheritance, our main unit is a gene. On a molecular level, transmission of genes happens through DNA replication. So, or we'll just go molecular inheritance. And that is based, molecular inheritance is based in DNA replication. We will talk a lot about the process of DNA replication, what enzymes are involved, mechanically how it works, where it can go wrong, all that fun stuff. And how, let's see, specifically in plants and animals, or things that reproduce sexually, and we'll talk about the difference between sexual and asexual reproduction in a minute. Reproductive cells called gametes are what transmits genes from one to the other. So, reproductive cells called gametes are the vehicles that transmit genes from parent to offspring. That transmit genes from parents to offspring. So in humans, it's egg, sperm. Those are our gametes. They are also known as sex cells. So, goodness gracious, the way that genes get from parents to offspring is through these gametes. When gametes combine, that is fertilization. Fertilization is gametes combining. So in plant cells, this can be something like pollen and an egg, right? When pollen meets egg, that is fertilization. So most of our DNA is in the nucleus of our cells. We talked a little bit when we talked about mitochondria, about how mitochondrial DNA also exists, how our mitochondria have some DNA, and that led to the whole idea of endosymbiotic theory. But most of our DNA is in chromosomes in the nucleus. So most DNA is in the nucleus. And that is packaged in chromosomes. We talked a bit about chromosome structure when we talked about mitosis. But in a refresher, a chromosome is a single strand of DNA coiled around histone proteins. Single strand of DNA coiled around, because that's not how you spell coiled around histone proteins. So, in somatic cells, somatic cells are all cells except sex cells. So every cell in your body except for, in this room, eggs, right? So all the cells in a human body except for eggs and sperm are called somatic cells. It's really, really cramped together. I need to get on my game. So in somatic cells, or our body cells, humans have 46 chromosomes. That is the standard for what a human cell is. So, one more bit of vocab for you. A gene's location along the length of a chromosome is called its locus or loci if we're talking about multiple genes. Location along the length of a chromosome is its locus. So if we've got a chromosome right here, and we say the gene for eye color is right here, that is the gene for eye color's locus. But the gene for eye color is a little bit more complicated. There are more than one genes that are actually involved in eye color. So if we had two of them, that is the genes for eye color's loci. Doing okay so far? I know it's first thing in the morning. I'm fresh off break. We're also going to briefly talk about the difference between sexual and asexual reproduction. In biology, the prefix a means without. So asexual reproduction is just reproduction without sex. So I'm going to make a little chart because I like charts. We're going to have sexual reproduction, and asexual reproduction. So, asexual reproduction, our offspring is genetically identical to a parent. If a yeast cell divides into two yeast cells, that is a form of asexual reproduction. That second new yeast cell is genetically identical to the first yeast cell. Some plants that are able to reproduce via budding, are also said to be able to reproduce asexually. So if you take a clipping off a plant in a grocery store and you propagate it on your own, grow a new plant out of it, that new plant is genetically identical to the plant that you took that clipping off of in the grocery store. Asexual reproduction. Like I said, we've got one parent, and there is no fusion of gametes. So the process of fertilization doesn't need to occur when we talk about asexual reproduction. This produces clones. And the definition of a clone is just something that is genetically identical to another thing. The concept of sexual reproduction is something we are a little bit more familiar with, as that is how we get more humans. We have two parents in sexual reproduction. We have an offspring with unique combinations of genes. And we have genetically different siblings. If we were to take two clippings off a plant, propagate them, and grow them, those two babies would be genetically identical. Whereas my biological parents had three kids, me, my little sister, my little brother. We all look completely different. So we have unique genetic features. Where are we at? So there are different ways that reproduction can take place. When we talk about genetic variation, that is where we are more focused on sexual reproduction, whereas asexual reproduction doesn't give us our genetic variation. It is fast, though. That's the big takeaway with asexual reproduction. If an organism isn't perfectly adapted to its environment, it's probably better off having offspring that are genetically identical to itself to ensure that the offspring are also adapted to the environment. But in varying environments, sexual reproduction is a little bit more sound. So here in Indiana, it gets really hot, it gets really cold. I'm one of those people who always has like a million layers on because I'm always cold. My sister never wears a winter coat because she's always hot. So two kids can both survive in a varying environment. They're just going to be uncomfy a little bit of the time. When it comes to different types of reproduction, we also have different sexual life cycles. A sexual life cycle is the generation to generation sequence of stages in the reproductive history of an organism. So let's see, generation to generation sequence of stages in the reproductive history of an organism. This is from conception to the production of offspring. So in humans, right? Conception, 9-month gestation, roughly 9-month gestation. Adolescence, where a person cannot yet reproduce, about, I guess it's more closer to 11 or 12. So like prepubescence through menopause is when a female person in a population is able to reproduce, and then there is a post-reproductive age, right? That's how human sexual life cycles work. There are other organisms that carry out their sexual life cycles in different ways. There are organisms that will only reproduce once in their life cycle. There are organisms that will reproduce a bunch of times in their life cycle. There are organisms that only fertilize one egg at a time. There are organisms that fertilize millions of eggs at a time. So we're going to talk about the differences in that, also how fertilization differs between organisms, and all that fun stuff. But before we can get into that, we have to talk about the different sets of chromosomes. That will hopefully help us keep everything straight tomorrow as we talk about sexual life cycles into the process of meiosis. So, first things first. Have you guys ever worked with karyotypes before? Little pictures where it's like a big square and you've got a bunch of chromosomes inside of it. Yeah. A karyotype is a micrograph of the 46 human chromosomes from a single cell in mitosis. So, micrograph of the 46 human chromosomes. They are in 23 pairs. So it'll look like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, they have a genetic disorder, but something like that, where they've got little sticks. Essentially, what they do is they take a cell that is in mitosis because we want those chromosomes condensed. So we want those prophase cells where the chromosomes are condensed. We what's the word? Break down the cell's nuclear envelope. We get the DNA isolated, and then we have a big old sheet of all of these chromosomes. We then cut all these chromosomes out and match them up and paste them onto one picture, and that picture is called a karyotype. Like we said, humans typically have 46 chromosomes, and they are in 23 pairs. These pairs are called homologous chromosomes. Homologous chromosomes. You will also hear them called homologs or homologs. Oh my goodness. Those are two chromosomes in a pair that have the same length, centromere position, and staining pattern. Two chromosomes in a pair with the same length, centromere position, and staining pattern. Depending on how many, like, what's the word? Hydrophilic and hydrophobic, or like positive leaning or negative leaning. That's not what I want to think of. Sorry. Depending on the concentrations of adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. That's where I was going. Different bases pick up the different types of dye a little bit differently. Also, some parts of a chromosome are more condensed than other parts of a chromosome, so they look different when they are stained. We have our 46 chromosomes. We have a special pair of chromosomes called sex chromosomes. Our sex chromosomes are chromosomes that determine an organism's biological sex. They are X and Y. If an organism has two X chromosomes, they are biologically female. If they have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, they are biologically male. That's not always the case. Sometimes people end up with just one X. Sometimes they end up with two X's and a Y. Those individuals can run into some issues when it comes to their own reproduction or whenever they hit puberty, but usually are treated with stuff like hormone treatments, and they're just everyday people. So, but this is typically how it works. So, biological mom has two X chromosomes. Biological dad has an X and a Y chromosome. You're gonna get an X from mom no matter what. It is up to the biological father to determine whether or not a child is going to be a male or female. So, I'm biologically female because my dad gave me an X chromosome. My little brother's biologically male because my dad gave him a Y chromosome. All other chromosomes are called autosomes. All other chromosomes are called autosomes. So, if it's not a sex chromosome, it's an autosome. We inherit one chromosome per pair from each parent. One chromosome from each pair from each parent. So our chromosomes are numbered. You get one chromosome 1 from mom, you get one chromosome 1 from dad. You get one chromosome 2 from your biological mother, you get one chromosome 2 from your biological father. And so on and so on and so on. One from each. This is where we get a little technical with it. The number of chromosomes in a single set is represented by the letter N. The number of chromosomes in a single set is represented by N. Usually if you see it written out in like a textbook, that N is in italics, but not always. So any cell, any somatic cell, I should say, so any just regular body cell that has two sets of our chromosomes, so our normal 46 chromosomes, is considered diploid. So any cell with two sets of chromosomes this is also called a 2N cell because there's two sets, is diploid. Somatic cells are diploid. So in humans, our diploid number, our 2N, is 46. Gametes have a single set of chromosomes because you're only going to get one set per parent, right? Gametes have a single set of chromosomes. Which we represent with the letter N. Are haploid. If an organism has more than two sets of chromosomes, they are considered polyploidy. Because they have more than just diploid, which is two, or haploid, which is one. So, diploid, haploid. So, in humans, make a little chart. In humans, our diploid number, our 2N, is 46, and our N is 23. We have 46 chromosomes in our diploid cells and 23 chromosomes in our haploid cells. Drosophila, they are little fruit flies. We use them to study genetics a lot. We use them to study genetics because their diploid number is 8. It's a lot simpler to study something with 8 chromosomes than it is to study something with 46 chromosomes. So they have 8 chromosomes in their diploid cells and 4 chromosomes in their haploid cells. But the number of chromosomes doesn't necessarily relate directly to complexity. Dogs, their diploid number is 78, which means their haploid number is 39. So, a somatic cell, or just a regular body cell, is diploid. It has 2 sets of chromosomes, one from each parent. And a gamete, or a sex cell, or eggs, or sperm, or pollen, all that fun stuff, is haploid. So they only have 1 set of chromosomes. And tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about sexual lifestyle or life cycles. Goodness gracious. And we will start the process of meiosis, which is how a cell gets to be from diploid to haploid. I know I talked a lot. Does anyone have any questions? No? Feel free to interrupt me at any point when I'm talking. Yes. Yes, there is. If you can fill that out for me, please. I believe I published everything last night.